The night before my housewarming, Mom's text landed. "We aren't coming. Your sister just moved, too." Just those words locked up a lifetime of being overlooked. The next morning, I crossed my parents' names off the best seats facing the ocean and rewrote the guest list, using only the names that were never invited. My name is Avery North. I am 34 years old, and I am standing in the center of a $6 million promise I made to myself. The house isn't a house, it's a statement. Built of structural steel and triple-glazed glass, cantilevered over a cliff in Montauk. The Atlantic is raging 40 feet below, but inside, the only sound is the architectural hum of the air filtration and the nervous tapping of my own fingernail against a quartz countertop. I am the founder of Northline Studio, a firm I built from a windowless basement room into a name whispered by people who care about emotional architecture. Tonight was supposed to be the validation. The final beam clicked into place. My name is Avery North. I am 34 years old, and I am standing in the center of a $6 million promise I made to myself. The house isn't a house. It's a statement. Built of structural steel and triple-glazed glass, cantilevered over a cliff in Montauk. The Atlantic is raging 40 feet below, but inside, the only sound is the architectural hum of the air filtration and the nervous tapping of my own fingernail against a quartz countertop. I am the founder of Northline Studio, a firm I built from a windowless basement room into a name whispered by people who care about emotional architecture. Tonight was supposed to be the validation. The final beam clicked into place. The candles were lit, dozens of them, unscented, pure beeswax. Their light was warm against the cool, moonlight blue of the ocean dusk. The great room was ready. I had designed the dining table myself, a single slab of reclaimed walnut, and at its head, I had placed 2 chairs, not just any chairs. They were the prototypes for a line I was developing, ergonomically perfect, upholstered in a soft, quiet linen. The honor seats, the seats I had mentally assigned my entire life, they faced the floor-to-ceiling glass, offering the most dramatic, gut-wrenching view of the ocean. They were for Mom and Dad. Everything was perfect. The air was still. The house was holding its breath, waiting. And then, my phone lit up the counter. The vibration was an obscenity in the quiet, a harsh, electric buzz against the stone. I wiped my hands on my apron, a stupid, hopeful domestic gesture, and looked. It was from Mom. "We aren't coming. Your sister just moved, too." That was it. The entire message. I read it 5 times, then 10, searching for the words that were missing. There was no sorry. There was no heartbroken. No, we'll make it up to you. No, let's reschedule. No excuse. Not really. Just a fact. Followed by a reason that was not a reason, but an explanation. "Your sister just moved, too." Sloane, my perpetually in crisis, perpetually adored younger sister, had moved, again, probably a 4th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, funded by an allowance I was never offered. Her minor life event had, as always, been placed on the scales against one of mine, and as always, my side of the scale flew up, light and meaningless. My $6 million house, 5 years of planning, zoning board fights, weather delays, and personal, agonizing sacrifice, weighed against Sloane's U-Haul. It was a tie, and in my family, a tie always goes to Sloane. I looked at the 2 chairs, the linen, the perfect view, the polished silver I had set, the seats of honor. I had built a temple for people who worshipped elsewhere. The air in my lungs felt thin. I walked over to the first candle, the one closest to my father's empty plate. I picked up the silver snuffer I'd bought for the occasion. The small, bell-shaped cup descended. The flame vanished, leaving a single, gray curl of smoke, the smell of a dead wick, acrid and final. I moved to the next candle, and the next. I went through the room methodically, one by one, extinguishing every tiny beacon of hope I had foolishly lit. The room grew dark, fast. The cold, blue light of the ocean took over, flooding the glass, turning the steel beams into black ribs. The house was empty, just me, and the smell of smoke. I spent the next week in a void. The house was a magnificent, hollow shell. I walked its perfect, radiant heated floors. I watched the storms roll in. The caterer kept the deposit, the flowers I had ordered, massive arrangements of white orchids and sea holly, wilted in their buckets in the pantry. I threw them off the cliff myself, watching the petals scatter on the wind. I didn't cry. Crying was a performance, and my entire life, my audience had been indifferent. Then, a week after the text, the show aired. The Housing Channel segment I had agreed to film months ago, I had forgotten. I turned on the 80-inch screen I'd recessed into the concrete wall. I watched it alone. From a sofa built for 12, nursing a glass of wine that cost more than my first car. The camera work was beautiful. It swooped over the cliff, capturing the dangerous, defiant angle of the roofline. The host, a woman with aggressively perfect teeth, was using words like genius and revolutionary. And then, my name, Avery North. It scrolled across the screen in a clean, sans serif font, the same color as the blue ribbon I won at the state science fair in 9th grade, the ribbon no one came to see. The moment the credits rolled, my phone, which had been silent for a week, detonated. It didn't ring. It shrieked, vibrating so hard on the teak side table it sounded like a captured animal. The screen lit up. Mom! A new call immediately after. Dad. And again, buzzing before the last ring had faded. Sloan. The Holy Trinity, the solar system that had long since ejected me, suddenly demanding its lost planet return. They were calling. They were calling because the television had told them to. The television had validated my existence in a way my blood and sweat never could. They hadn't seen the house. They had seen the reception of the house. And now, they wanted in. They wanted their seats back. I just watched it buzz. Mom, Dad, Sloan, again and again. The demands grew more frantic. A text message cut through the barrage. From Sloan. Why won't you answer? Mom is freaking out. I let it ring, and as it rang, my own voice, the one I had recorded for the show's voiceover, filled the silence in the room. The host had asked me about the open plan layout, the lack of private, hierarchical spaces. My recorded voice was calm, clear, and confident. It was the voice of Avery North, the architect. For me, fairness isn't just an aesthetic. It's not a coat of paint or a decorative throw pillow. It's the frame. It's the foundation. If the structure is unfair, no amount of decoration can fix it. The phone finally, blessedly, went silent. The show cut to a commercial for laminate flooring. The giant screen went black. And in that polished black void, I saw my reflection, a small, 34-year-old woman, alone in a vast, dark room, and behind my reflection, projected in the dark glass, were the two empty chairs. They weren't chairs anymore. They were two cold, judgmental eyes, staring at me. They were the physical proof of the emptiness I'd been trying to fill. The realization landed with the quiet weight of a structural beam settling into place. If love has to be begged for, it is not love. It is a handout. It is a favor. And I was done begging. I am a builder. I don't beg for structures. I design them. If the old structure was rotten, I would simply build a new one. I left the wine. I walked to my office, the one room I had not shown the cameras. It was my sanctuary. I turned on a single, warm brass desk lamp. I pulled out a fresh Northline journal, the one with the thick, creamy paper and a heavy black ink pen. I used a steel ruler to draw a single line down the center of the page. The sound of the pen on the paper was the only sound in the world. At the top of the left column, I wrote, "Always had a seat." It took me less than 10 seconds to fill it. Mom, Dad, Sloan. Then, I looked at the right column. At the top, I wrote, "Never invited." My hand was not shaking. This was not a moment of anger. It was a moment of clarity. It was an act of architecture. I was drafting a new floor plan. I touched the pen to the paper. The first name I wrote was Grandma Ruth, my mother's mother. A woman who laughed too loud and was always told to shh at the dinner table. The one who slipped me $20 bills and told me I was smarter than all of them put together. She was never invited to the nice dinners. The next name? Caleb North, my cousin, a brilliant carpenter who builds custom furniture that belongs in museums. My father called him wasted potential for not getting a real degree. He was never invited because he had sawdust under his nails. Ms. Adler, my high school science teacher, the one who laminated that blue ribbon for me, saying, "This is the first of many, Avery." She was the only one who ever saw the frame. The list grew. The names filled the page. The crew foreman from this project, the immigrant couple who now tend my gardens with meticulous care, my old college roommate, Jules, a single mother my parents had labeled unstable, the owner of the local Italian joint who fed me on nights I worked too late to cook. The left column had 3 names. The right column became a community. I looked at the list. The house, which had felt so cold and empty, suddenly had a purpose. It wasn't built for the left column. It was built for the right one. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I started a new group text. I began to invite the people who had been left out of the family table, my rules, my house, to understand the 2 empty chairs. You have to understand the house I grew up in. It wasn't a structure of wood and drywall. It was a solar system, and it was built wrong. In the North family, there was one son. Her name was Sloane. She was not a quiet, life-giving star. She was a binary pulsar, a supernova, a constant, shrieking explosion of needs and light and noise. Everything, and everyone, was caught in her gravity. My parents were the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, revolving in tight, scorched, dutiful orbits, their entire existence dedicated to absorbing her flares and reflecting her light. They charted their lives by her. And me? I was Avery. I was not a planet. I was not even a moon. I was Pluto, decades before its discovery, a cold, distant rock in the dark. I was the other one, the beige daughter, the orderly, undemanding one, the one who did her homework without being asked, who set her own alarm, who never had a tantrum, and who, as a result, was treated less like a child and more like a dependable piece of furniture, a well-made, quiet, beige chair that you never notice until you need to sit down. My rewards were practical, while Sloane was showered in glitter, dolls, and anything pink that could be bought at a mall. I was given graph paper. I was given sets of mechanical pencils. I was given a subscription to a science magazine. Avery is the practical one, my mother would tell her friends, a statement that was meant as a compliment, but felt like a diagnosis. It meant, she does not need, she does not want, she is fine. I learned the math of this universe early. An A+ on my report card, a 98% on a physics exam that made the curve, was met with a distracted, "That's nice, Ma, honey," from my mother. Her eyes already scanning the room for Sloane. It was expected. It was beige. It was just Avery, being reliable. But a C- from Sloane? A C- on a book report she'd had 6 weeks to write? That was a family crisis. That was an emergency summit. I remember one Tuesday night. I was 12. I'd brought home my report card. Straight A's. I'd set it on the kitchen counter. My father glanced at it, nodded, and said, "Good job, sport." Then Sloane came in, an hour late, holding a single crumpled piece of paper as if it were a death sentence. It was a D on an algebra quiz. The house went into lockdown. "Avery, go to your room," my mother said, her voice tight with that specific, Sloane-focused panic. "Your father and I need to speak with your sister." I sat on my bed, the door closed, and listened to the muffled, 4-hour strategic meeting that followed. I heard yelling. I heard crying. Mostly from Sloane. I heard my father's booming voice about not applying herself, and my mother's softer, worried tones about maybe she needs a tutor, or is something wrong at school? It was a full-scale, code-red emotional event. They were dissecting her feelings, her future, her potential. I looked at my report card, still clutched in my hand. It felt like a blank piece of paper. It didn't matter. In this solar system, failure was interesting. Failure was bright. My quiet, boring, beige success was invisible. Over time, I came to understand the 3 unwritten rules of our home. They were as solid as the foundation. Rule number 1. Sloane's needs dictate the family schedule. All of it. I was in the district finals for the debate team my junior year. It was the most important night of my academic life. My mother had promised to come. An hour before I was supposed to leave, Sloane decided she was having a friendship crisis and absolutely had to go to the mall to buy a new outfit for a party she might not even be invited to. My mother looked at me, her expression one of chronic apology. "Avery, you're so self-sufficient. You can get a ride with your teacher, can't you? Sloane she really needs me tonight." I went to the finals alone. I won. I came home to an empty house, my trophy a cold, heavy thing in my backpack. Rule number 2. Sloane's emotions are a public concern. Avery's emotions are a private inconvenience. When Sloane's first boyfriend, a pimply kid named Josh, broke up with her over text message, my mother canceled her book club for a week. She sat with Sloane. They baked. They watched old movies. Our house became a hospital for her minor heartbreak. 2 years later, when I received the rejection letter from the summer architecture program at Columbia, a program I had spent 6 months on the application for, I made the mistake of crying at the dinner table. My father looked up from his newspaper. "For goodness sake, Avery, it's a summer program. Stop being so dramatic. If you wanted it, you should have tried harder." Sloane just stared at her phone. Texting, the message was clear. "Your pain is loud. Your pain is a bother." Rule number 3. The spotlight only faces one direction. The rest of us are the audience, and we must be a quiet, appreciative audience. My father was the high priest of this rule. He had a big, heavy VHS camcorder that he'd bought in 1991. It was his most prized possession, and that camcorder lens was, biologically, part of Sloane. Christmas morning, Sloane would be at the center of the living room, tearing through mountains of gifts, my gifts, smaller, fewer, and wrapped in the Sunday newspaper comics section, would be off to the side. "Hold it up, Sloane," my father would boom, the heavy camera whirring on his shoulder. "Show Daddy. Oh, look at that. Beautiful." He filmed her every reaction, every smile, every manufactured squeal of delight. He has hours, days, of footage of Sloane. That 9th grade science fair, the one where I won the blue ribbon for a project on structural load-bearing and bridges, I was so proud. I came home, clutching the ribbon. My father was in the living room, camera on his shoulder. My heart leaped. "Dad," I said, "I won. I got first place." "That's great. Avery, just a second," he said. He didn't turn. He was filming Sloane, who was in the backyard, trying to teach our bored Labrador how to roll over. "Look at this. She's almost got him. Atta girl. Sloane. Who's a smart girl?" I stood in the doorway, the blue ribbon turning sweaty in my hand. The lens never panned. The spotlight never wavered. I was a background extra in the movie of my own family. So, you learn, you adapt. You learn to keep the house quiet by fading away. I became an expert in it. I learned how to make myself small, how to take up less space, how to need less, to ask for nothing. I became my own parent, my own cheerleader, my own support system. I built an entire world inside myself because the one outside was not built for me. I became invisible as a survival tactic. And in that silence, in that beige, lonely, quiet space, something else started to grow. I started to read spaces, not just people. I started to understand that a room could be a weapon. A dinner table could be a courtroom. A hallway could be a barrier. I learned that the way a house was built, the way the light hit a room, the way a door opened, all of it was a form of communication. It was a silent, powerful language. I would sit at our family dinner table, ignored, and I would analyze it. The head of the table where my father sat. A throne. The way Sloane's chair was always angled more toward him. The way my chair was nearest the kitchen. The first one to be dismissed. The easiest to get up from to clear the plates. It was all there. The power. The hierarchy. The neglect. It was all in the architecture. The seed of what I would become. The architect of emotional spaces was planted right there, in that cold, imbalanced, eccentric solar system. I learned that a structure could make you feel unseen, and I made a promise to myself, in that 9-year-old, then 12-year-old, then 17-year-old silence. One day, I would build a structure that couldn't lie. I would build a place where the light was fair. I would build a room where no one was beige, and no one was a son. I would build a house where every single chair was a seat of honor. And I did. I just sent the invitations to the wrong people. It was the summer I turned 13. Sloane had been shipped off to a performing arts camp in the Adirondacks, a 3-month extravaganza designed to harness her boundless, chaotic energy. With her departure, the sun in our solar system had been extinguished. The house fell silent, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, thick and damp as a wool blanket left out in the rain. My parents, without their star to orbit, drifted through the halls like ghosts. They were inert, their purpose suspended. The entire house felt like a held breath, waiting for its center of gravity to return and tell it what to do. I, on the other hand, had never felt so light. I wandered the house, then the yard, an invisible girl in an empty kingdom. The silence that was a prison for my parents was, for me, an open field. And it was in that field, behind the leaky, collapsing shed where my father kept his broken lawnmowers, that I found it. It was a pile of wood, not lumber, but scrap. The previous owners had left it, and it was slowly returning to the earth. Most of it was useless, gray and soft with rot. But underneath, protected from the worst of the rain, was a single, massive slab of walnut. It was at least 3 inches thick, covered in moss, spiderwebs, and the silver trails of slugs. It was ruined. It was perfect. I found a rusty, hand-me-down toolbox in the shed. Inside, an old Black & Decker orbital sander with a frayed cord, a half-empty box of screws, and a handful of bent, coppery nails. I had no plan. I had no skill. I just had the silence. And this piece of wood that looked like how I felt. I decided I would build a table. I dragged the slab out. It was heavier than I was, and I left a long, muddy scar in the backyard. I found an old, dull handsaw. My first cut was a disaster. I was trying to square off an end, and the saw blade buckled, jumping its groove and skating across the wood, leaving a hideous, jagged line. I pushed harder, frustrated, and the blade bit into the flesh next to my fingernail. The pain was sharp, electric. I pulled my hand back and watched, fascinated, as a bright, perfect bead of red blood welled up. It was a dark and shocking color against my sawdust-covered skin. I sat back on my heels. I waited. I did the automatic thing. I held my breath and listened for the sound of the screen door opening, the sound of my mother's worried voice, the sound of footsteps running to fix it. Nothing. Just the buzz of a cicada in the oak tree, the far-off sound of a lawnmower. 2 streets over, the house remained silent. No one came. No one knew I was bleeding. I looked at the blood, then at the crooked, ugly saw line, and a feeling I couldn't name, a feeling that was equal parts terror and exhilaration, flooded my chest. This was it. This was freedom. I was entirely, completely on my own. I got up, went inside the quiet house, walked past my father dozing in his armchair, and went to the bathroom. I washed my hand, found a bandage, and wrapped my own thumb. I did not say a word. I went back outside. It took me 3 days. 3 days of solid, grueling, uninstructed labor. My arms ached with a dull, thrumming fire. The old sander was a monster, rattling my bones, making my hands go numb and tingly. I had to keep stopping, unplugging it, waiting for the motor to cool. I became an expert in the smell of hot, ozone-laced dust. I sanded. I sanded until the silver-gray layer of rot and weather stain finally gave way. I sanded until the wood began to change, as if I were freeing a prisoner from a stone. The color that emerged beneath was astonishing. It wasn't just brown. It was a universe of chocolate, amber, and deep, smoky purple. The grain was wild, a map of knots and whorls. I sanded until my shoulders screamed and my hands were blistered, until the surface was no longer a piece of scrap, but a living, breathing thing. I used the legs from a broken gardening bench. I didn't know how to join them. I didn't know about mortise and tenon. I just used the rusty nails and the screws. I hammered them in at odd, desperate angles. I drove screws so deep they splintered the wood. Then I drove others to compensate. On the third evening, I stood back. It was the ugliest piece of furniture in the history of the world. It was a marvel of imperfection. It was not square. It was not level. One leg was visibly shorter than the others, and I had been forced to shore it up with a small, flat rock. The top, which I had sanded with such devotion, was still warped from its years in the damp. It was, by every conceivable measure, a failure. But it was standing. It was solid. I put both my hands on it and pushed. With all my 13-year-old weight, it didn't wobble. It didn't creak. The very flaws, the crooked legs, the way I had driven the nails in at opposing angles, had created a strange, brutalist, unshakable structure. It stood firm, bound together by its own mistakes. I was cleaning the last of the sawdust off my arms when my father walked out onto the back patio. He was holding his evening glass of water. He saw me. Then he saw the table. He walked over, his face unreadable in the dusk. He didn't speak. He just put his glass down on it, then placed his large, heavy hand on the surface. He ran his palm over the grain, feeling the warp I hadn't been able to sand out. He rocked it, testing its strength. He leaned on it. He nodded. Once, he looked at me, and for a second, I thought he might be proud. He said 6 words, just 6. "It's crooked, but it's very solid." He picked up his glass and went back inside. It was not a compliment. It was not praise. It was better. It was an observation. It was a fact. He had seen the work, and he had diagnosed it correctly. He had seen it. I was still glowing from this, the most profound acknowledgement of my life, when my mother appeared at the screen door. She slid it open, her face pinched in disgust. "Avery, what is that?" she asked, not stepping outside. "Don't bring that spider-filled thing into the house. It's filthy." And that was that. The verdict was in. It was crooked, but solid. It was filthy. Both were true. So, the table stayed in the shed. It never made it into the house, but the shed, which had been a forgotten graveyard of tools, became my room, my real room. I did my homework on that table, the warped surface making my pencils roll. I spread my graph paper out and drew my first blueprints on it. Impossible houses with secret rooms and hidden staircases. I sat there in the smell of damp earth, hot wood, and old oil, and I dreamed. That table became the first piece of furniture I owned. When I left for college, my father, in a rare moment of collaborative silence, helped me load it into the back of a truck. It didn't fit in my dorm room. It was too big, too ugly, too raw. I made it fit. It became my desk, my dining table, my island of stability. It followed me to my first leaky, post-college apartment in the city. It was the only decent thing in a room full of cast-offs. I hosted my first dinner party on it. 8 people crammed around a table meant for 4. When I started Northline Studio, in a rented 10 by 10 foot former storage room, I couldn't afford a desk. I brought in the table. It took up almost the entire space. It was absurd. It was my anchor. It sits in my office at Northline to this day. Not my home office in Montauk, but my real office, the one in the city. It's covered in scars, and I know every one. There is a deep, black burn mark from a soldering iron I dropped in college. There are countless overlapping coffee rings, the ghosts of 1,000 all-night drafting sessions. There are the faint parallel lines where I accidentally cut through a mat board with an X-Acto knife. Each mark is a coordinate. Each flaw is a part of the map. That table is my proof, the piece of evidence I have carried with me my entire life. It is the reminder that you can build a structure that is true, a structure that is impossibly strong, even from the materials that everyone else has left for dead. You can build a life, even from what is crooked. Northline Studio started small, just me and the walnut table in that 10 by 10 room. For the first 2 years, I took the jobs no one else wanted: claustrophobic bathroom renovations, awkward basement conversions, kitchens in pre-war apartments that had all the wrong angles, and in those small, forgotten spaces, I found my voice. I wasn't just moving walls. I was rerouting currents of emotional energy. I was applying the lessons I'd learned in that silent, imbalanced house. My practice grew. Word of mouth is a powerful thing in a city full of people who feel unseen. I hired an intern, then an associate. Within 5 years, Northline Studio had a small, bright office in Tribeca and a reputation. A design magazine, in a profile I suspect no one in my family ever read, coined the term emotional architecture. It stuck. I wasn't interested in facades. I didn't care about the statement a building made to the street. I cared about the statement it made to the people inside it. I didn't sell square footage. I designed behavior. For a client who grew up in a chaotic, loud, invasive family, I designed a library. It wasn't just a room with shelves. It was a soundproofed sanctuary, with walls insulated not just for temperature, but for peace. I used heavy, soft materials, wool, felt, and unpolished wood, that drank the sound, creating a space so profoundly quiet, it was almost like being underwater. I designed a chair, a throne, just for him, positioned under a single, focused light. It was the first truly private space he had ever owned. He wept when he first sat in it. For a woman who had spent 30 years as a wife and mother, whose life had been a series of acts of service. I designed a kitchen, but it wasn't the open-concept kitchen everyone wanted. She told me, her voice small, that she had always felt on display, a short-order cook in the family restaurant. So I did the opposite. I designed a kitchen that was hers. It was connected to the dining room, but through a discreet, sliding panel of fluted glass. It had a professional-grade range, a view of her private garden, and most importantly, a door that locked. I gave her control over her own space. She called it her cockpit. My work was, by nature, quiet. It was about subtraction, not addition. It was about creating calm, not manufacturing drama. And then came the client who broke me, a new money hedge fund manager and his third wife. They wanted a Hampton statement. They came to me because I was the new thing. I presented my designs. A home built around a central, silent courtyard, a place for air and light to gather, with materials that would age gracefully, that would respond to the seasons. The wife looked at my renders, then at me, and said the words that would change my life. "I don't get it," she said, tapping her long red fingernail on the drawing. "It's all so quiet. It's boring. Avery, can't you make it louder?" Louder. She wanted a house that screamed. She wanted what Sloane always had, the spotlight, the noise. She wanted a house that would get her noticed. I walked away from the commission. It was a massive financial hit, but I understood something in that moment. I had been building quiet rooms for other people, but I had not yet built my own. I had been designing structures of fairness for others, while still living in the shadow of my own family's profoundly unfair one. The critic in my head, the one who dismissed my work, had my mother's voice. The client who wanted louder was just my sister in a different suit. I decided I was done. I would not do it for a client. I would not do it for a magazine. I would do it for me. I would build my thesis statement. I would build the house I had been designing in my head since I was 9 years old. I would build a structure that was so true, so fair, that it could not be misunderstood. I liquidated, I sold my apartment in the city. I cashed out my stocks, took out a business loan that made my accountant turn white, and poured every dollar I had, every dollar I had ever earned, into this one singular project. I started looking for the land, not a polite, manicured lot in a gated community. I wanted land that had character, land that had fought. I wanted land that was crooked but solid. It took a year, a real estate broker, a man with a suspiciously dark tan, finally took me to a place he called The Problem. He'd been trying to sell it for 5 years. It was in Montauk, at the very end of the island, where the land gets wild and gives up. It wasn't a lot. It was a wound, a jagged granite cliff edge that had been carved out by millennia of storms. It was beautiful, but it was brutal. It's a beauty, but it's mean, the broker warned, staying a safe distance from the edge. The salt wind was a physical force, a giant, invisible hand that shoved you backward. It tore at your clothes, filled your mouth with salt. Below, the Atlantic wasn't gently lapping. It was tearing itself, throwing itself against the rocks in a white, angry explosion. "It's uninsurable," he yelled over the wind. "The erosion is a nightmare. The zoning is a joke. You'd have to sink caissons 30 feet into the bedrock just to build a deck." I stood on the edge, the wind whipping my hair into a painful knot. I tasted the salt. I felt the raw, untamed power of the place. It wasn't beige. It wasn't quiet. It was the loudest, most honest thing I had ever seen. "I'll take it," I said. The broker laughed, then saw my face. "You're serious?" My design was not a house. It was a dialogue with that cliff. I would not fight the wind. I would not hide from the ocean. I would build a structure that invited it in, that respected its power, but that would not, under any circumstances, break. I chose my materials: structural steel, the kind used for bridges, to anchor us to the bedrock, polished, load-bearing concrete for the foundation, and glass, walls and walls of it, triple-glazed, storm-rated, to let the ocean be the largest, loudest room in the house, and inside, to bring warmth to the steel and the glass. I would use walnut, my signature, a nod to the crooked table that started it all. The floor plan was the thesis. There was no master bedroom. There was no owner's suite. I designed 3 identical guest bedrooms, each one with the exact same square footage, the same size closet, and the same breathtaking corner window view of the ocean. There was no best room. It was a physical, structural statement of equality. The light was shared. The view was shared. The great room was the centerpiece, a vast open space where the kitchen, dining, and living areas flowed into one. It was a space designed for a community, not for a hierarchy. No one would be hidden in a kitchen. No one would be relegated to the bad seat. The build took 2 years. 2 years of my life. I was not a distant architect. Faxing in plans, I was there, every single day. My car the first one at the site, the last to leave. I wore a hard hat. I learned the names of every single person on my crew, from the foreman, a tough-as-nails man named Sal, to the youngest apprentice, a kid from the local town learning to tile. I bought them coffee. I listened to their stories. I signed every single purchase order, every payroll check, every invoice. When the steel beams were welded into place, I was the one who climbed the scaffolding to check the joints. When the concrete was poured, I was the one who watched it cure. I knew every flaw, every seam, every compromise. The final cost was just over $6 million. It was my entire accumulated life. It was every late night, every missed vacation, every client I had ever had, all consolidated into this one structure of glass and steel and belief. It was a $6 million declaration that fairness is not a decoration. It is the frame. A week before it was finished, as the painters were applying the final coat, I got the call. A producer from a major housing channel. They had heard about the crazy glass house on the cliff. They wanted to feature it. I said yes. It felt like the final step. The name of the episode, they told me, would be Rooms for the Rest of Us. I almost laughed. It was perfect. They had no idea how right they were. With the filming complete, there was only one thing left to do. The house was finally ready. It was perfect. It was solid. I went out and bought the linen upholstery for the 2 honor seats. I set a date for the housewarming. I made a list. It was a very short list. Mom, Dad, Sloan. I didn't want a party. I didn't want a parade. I had already had the validation from the press, from my peers. This was different. This was just family. I wanted them to come. I wanted them to stand in the great room, to feel the wind, to see the ocean. I wanted them to see what I had built. Not the $6 million house, but the statement. I wanted them to see the fair, equal rooms. I wanted them to see the structure I had made, a structure built on all the principles they had ignored. I didn't need them to say, "We are sorry." I didn't need them to say, "We were wrong." I just needed them to stand on the walnut floor, look at the life I had built from the scraps they never saw, and say 4 simple, practical words. "You did well, Avery." That's all I wanted. A simple acknowledgement, a final, quiet, structural click, the sound of a lock, finally, falling into place. The text message didn't land like a bomb. A bomb is loud, chaotic, and unexpected. This was the opposite. It was quiet, precise, and, in a way I was only just beginning to understand. Completely expected. It was the sound of a heavy, well-made, $1,000 deadbolt sliding into its custom-milled strike plate. A perfect, clean, final click, the lock on my childhood, the one I had been rattling for 34 years, trying to pick with achievements and good grades and polite silence, was finally, irrevocably, shut. "We aren't coming. Your sister just moved, too." I stood there in the great room, the phone in my hand, a cold, dead weight. The house, my $6 million thesis, was silent, except for the wind and the surf. The candles I had just lit, the ones meant to welcome them, flickered on the long walnut table. The 2 honor seats at the head, facing the ocean, were empty. They had been empty my whole life. Tonight, I had just made the mistake of putting linen upholstery on them. My first thought was not of sadness. It was not anger. Not yet. My first thought, the architect's thought, was, the calculation is complete. The variable is solved. The variable was hope, and the answer was 0. I set the phone down on the counter. I did not throw it. I did not text back. I did not call. Begging. I was done begging. I looked at the table, set for a validation that would never arrive. My first call was to the chef, a man I deeply respected, who was bringing his entire team from the city. I looked at the clock. It was 8:15 p.m. He was probably already on the Long Island Expressway. I dialed. He picked up on the second ring, his voice professional and bright. "Avery, we are about 45 minutes out. Smoked uni is secure." "Antoine," I said, and my voice was strange. It was flat, calm. The voice I used on a job site when a steel beam was measured wrong. "Turn around." A silence. "Excuse me?" "A personal emergency has come up. The dinner is canceled. I need you to turn your team around and go back to the city. I will, of course, pay the full fee, plus the inconvenience, for you and your staff." "Avery, is everything—" "I'm fine. Antoine, I am just— the event is not happening. Please, send me the invoice. Drive safe." I hung up before he could argue, before the professional calm in my voice cracked, and the 34 years of beige came pouring out. The deposit was gone. Tens of thousands of dollars. I felt nothing. I walked through the great room, which smelled of beeswax and sea salt. I picked up the silver snuffer. I started with the candle closest to my father's empty chair. I extinguished it. The small bell covered the flame, and the wick sighed, releasing a tiny plume of gray smoke. I moved to my mother's. Click, another one, and another. I walked the length of the table, a priestess performing a reverse ritual, unblessing the room, taking back the light. When I was done, the house was dark, only the moon, shining on the furious, white-capped ocean. lit the space. I had extinguished the party. But as I stood there in the cold, blue, expensive dark, I realized something vital. I had canceled the candles, but I had not canceled myself. I was not extinguished. I was just alone. And for the first time in my life, the aloneness of it all didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a fact. It felt solid. I don't know how long I sat there. I sat on the 12-person sofa. In the dark, I watched the ocean. The house was doing its job. The structure was sound. The triple-glazed windows didn't rattle. Even as the wind howled, the concrete foundation didn't shift. The house I had built was honest, and it was holding me. At some point, the grief must have come. Not the hot grief of a fresh wound, but the cold, tired grief of a chronic condition, the grief of the A+ on the fridge, of the camera always pointing the other way, of the blue ribbon laminated by a teacher because no parent was there to see it. It all just washed over me, a tide coming in, and I let it. I let it all be true. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, my neck was stiff. The moon was gone. The room was that deep, inky black that comes just before dawn. I looked at my phone. It was 2:13 in the morning. And the thought, the one that had been building like a pressure system, finally arrived. It was so simple, so clean. The structure is perfect. The guest list was wrong. I stood up. I walked out of the great room, my footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. I went into my office, the one room I had not shown the cameras. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I turned on the single, warm brass lamp on my desk. It illuminated my black and white journal, my logbook, my book of facts. I opened it to a fresh, clean, cream-colored page. I picked up my favorite pen, a heavy, black ink rollerball. I used my steel architect's ruler, the one I'd had since grad school. I drew a single, perfect, black line down the center of the page. The sound of the pen on the thick paper was like a blade cutting silk. At the top of the left column, I wrote 2 words, always had a seat. It took me less than 30 seconds to fill the column. Mom, Dad, Sloan. 3 names, the entire population of the solar system I had been trying to win. I looked at the 3 names, and then at the vast, empty white space of the rest of the column. It was a summary of my entire emotional life. Then, I moved my pen to the top of the right column. I paused. The wind outside seemed to pause with me. I wrote, my handwriting clear and strong, never invited. I touched the pen to the paper. The first name I wrote, the one that came without thinking, was Grandma Ruth, my mother's mother, the one who wore bright, purple sequins and laughed from her belly, the one my mother was always shing at family dinners. Ruth, for God's sake, lower your voice. Ruth, that's not appropriate. Grandma Ruth was the one who, after I'd been ignored for an entire Thanksgiving, would corner me by the back door, press a crumpled $20 bill into my hand, and whisper, "Don't let them make you beige. Avery, you're a firecracker. Don't let them put you out." My mother stopped inviting her to nice things about 10 years ago. The next name, Caleb North, my cousin, my father's brother's son, a man with the hands of a god and the soul of a poet, who happened to express himself through carpentry. He builds custom furniture that belongs in museums. But he didn't go to college. He works with his hands. My father, a man who has never built a single thing, calls him wasted potential. He was never invited to our house because, as my mother once said, he brings the smell of sawdust and, honestly, what do we talk about? The pen was moving faster now. Ms. Adler, my high school science teacher, the one who saw my bridge project, the one who, when I came to school the next day, had taken my flimsy blue ribbon and laminated it, turning it into something permanent. "You have a gift, Avery," she'd said, pressing it into my hand. "A gift for structure." I still have that laminated ribbon in my desk drawer. She was the first person who ever saw my work. Jules, my college roommate, Jules, who got pregnant her junior year from a philosophy major who quoted Sartre and then disappeared. Jules, who had the baby, finished her degree, and now runs a nonprofit for single mothers, all while being the most brilliant, funny, resilient human I have ever known. My parents met her once, at graduation. My mother's only comment, "What a tragedy. Such an unstable life." My mother, who had never faced a single day of instability, mistook resilience for a flaw. The list was flowing. I was no longer thinking. I was just recording the facts. Sal, my foreman, the man who stood on this cliff with me in nor'easter, screaming over the wind about load-bearing joints, the man who saw my designs, the impossible cantilever, and didn't laugh, but said, "All right, boss, let's build this crazy bastard." He saw the house, Maria and Hector, the couple I hired for landscaping and housekeeping. I had come out one night to find them having a small picnic on the patio, sharing a thermos. They apologized, terrified. I told them the patio was theirs as much as mine. Maria told me, in careful English, that she had never seen a house that listened to the wind. Mr. Vittori, the owner of the little Italian place in town, Nonna Pia, the one who fed me lasagna and told me I was too skinny on the hundreds of nights I showed up at 9:30, covered in concrete dust, too tired to speak. I put the pen down. I looked at the page. The left column, 3 names, a list of debts, a list of judges. The right column, a dozen names, 20 names, a list of builders, a list of witnesses, a list of people who saw, who laughed, who worked. The left column was a 3-person funeral. The right column was a party. The house had been built for the right column. I had just been too blind, too locked in that old, cold solar system, to see it. The plan was not strategic. It was a reflex. It was the most honest structural correction I had ever made in my life. I picked up my phone, the screen still cold from the night. I went to my never invited list. I created a new group text. I typed, my thumbs were steady. The message was simple. The message was the truth. Change of plans. My housewarming is tomorrow night. It is not a formal dinner. It is a real party. Come, bring your spouses. Bring your kids. Bring yourselves. My house is your house. Here, everyone has a seat. I hit send, and for the first time, in my brand new $6 million house, I was not alone. I slept in my clothes, right there on the 12-person sofa. When I woke up, the sun was exploding over the horizon, turning the entire Atlantic into a sheet of molten, blinding gold. The house was filled with a light so bright it was almost violent. It was 5 a.m. For a moment, the weight of the rejection, the emptiness of the house, settled on me. The honor seats were still there, 2 silent, linen-wrapped accusations in the morning light, the long, perfect, empty walnut table. The whole setup was a monument to a single, failed assumption. My architectural training took over. When a design fails, you don't cry about it. You don't stare at the flawed blueprint and wish it were different. You get a new piece of paper. You identify the structural flaw. You redesign. The flaw was the table. It was a line. A line is about hierarchy. A line has a beginning and an end. A line has a head, and by definition, a foot. A line is a weapon for a dinner party. It creates a vector of power. And my entire life I had been at the wrong end of it. I went to my office. I pulled out the original floor plan for the great room. I had spent weeks on it, optimizing sightlines and flow. I found the section showing the dining layout, that long, elegant, dominant rectangle. I took my thickest, blackest marker, the one I used for rejecting bad structural reports, and I drew a massive, thick X right through it. The squeak of the marker on the vellum was the loudest, most satisfying sound I had heard in days. I grabbed a fresh sheet of tracing paper, laid it over the plan, and started to sketch. I wasn't designing for 3 people anymore. I was designing for 30, for 40. I was designing for a community. A line wouldn't work. A circle was too cliché and inefficient. But a U was interesting. A U was a half embrace. It was open. It had an inside and an outside. But crucially, it had no head. in a U shape. Everyone is on the line. Everyone can see everyone. I oriented the open end of the U to face the sea. The ocean would be the guest of honor, the only thing at the head of the table. The sketch was fast, messy, and absolutely right. I had my new blueprint. Now, I had to build it. It was 5:30 in the morning. I made my first call. The rental company. A sleepy-voiced agent picked up. "This is Highline Event Rentals. How can I—" "Hi, this is Avery North," I said, my voice all business. "I have an emergency order for tonight, 701 Cliffside, Montauk." "Ms. North, we don't have an order for you. Your file says you canceled." "I know. That was a different party. This is a new one. I need tables. 8-foot rectangles. Let's see. I need 6 of them. And I need chairs." "6. Okay. And how many of the ghost chairs, or the Hamptons Whitewood?" I looked at my beautiful $6 million room. "Neither," I said. "I don't care what they look like. I don't want your Hamptons collection. I want your church basement bingo night collection. I need 40 chairs. 40. Whatever you have that is cheap, sturdy, and can get here by 3 p.m. Mismatched is fine. Folding is perfect. The only criteria is that they hold a human being." There was a long, confused pause. "Ma'am, you want folding chairs?" "40 of them, and 6 folding tables. Sturdy, not fussy. Send me the bill. 3 p.m. I hung up. My second call, the florist. This one was easier. She was a local woman who was probably already at the flower market. "Avery, hi. I was so sorry to hear about last night." "Me too, Carla. But I have a new plan. The orchids are dead. The white-on-white theme is dead. I need a new order for delivery this afternoon." "Oh, okay. What's the new theme?" "The new theme," I said, looking at my never-invited list, "is fun. The theme is loud. The theme is, you're finally here. I don't want a single structural centerpiece. I want buckets. Just galvanized buckets. 10 of them. And I want you to fill them with whatever is colorful and wild and smells good. Wildflowers, daisies, sunflowers, whatever you have that looks like it was just ripped out of a field by a happy person. No arrangements, just joy. Can you do that?" "Buckets of joy," she said, and I could hear her smile. "I can do that, Avery, that I can do." My third call. This one was the most important. I dialed the number for Nonna Pia, the local Italian joint. Mr. Vittori picked up. Even though the restaurant wouldn't open for 6 hours, he was always there, baking. "Pronto, Nonna Pia." "Mr. Vittori, it's Avery. Avery North." "Avery, my skinny architect, you are up early or you are up late?" "A little of both," I said, smiling. The man had fed me more times than my own family had in the last 5 years. "Mr. Vittori, I have a disaster, which is also an opportunity. I am having a party, tonight, for about 35 people, and I have no food." "Ah," he boomed. "The fancy chef. He ran away?" "I sent him away. His food was too quiet. Mr. Vittori, I was wondering, I know this is insane, but could you feed us? I don't want tiny, fussy food. I want your food. I want lasagna. I want 2 of those massive trays. 1 meat, 1 vegetable." "Lasagna, yes, this is party food." "And salad, a mountain of it. And all the garlic bread you own. Just all of it. And Jules is coming, my friend, with her 2 kids. Can you make pizza? Just like 5 or 6 large, simple cheese pizzas for the kids?" "Avery," he said, and his voice was suddenly thick with emotion. "You are having a festa, a real party. You do not want the fancy. You want the familia. I will feed you. You leave it to me. 5:30. It will be there. And I put in cannoli. You cannot have a festa without cannoli." I hung up the phone and I was actually, finally, crying. But they were hot. Fast tears of relief. The structure was sound. The materials were on their way. The rest of the day was a blur of manual labor. I pushed the giant, billion-pound walnut table against the back wall. It would be the buffet. I moved the 12-person sofa. I rolled up the $1,000 silk and wool rug. I was a builder. This was just site prep. At 3 p.m., the rental truck arrived. The driver, a kid in a baseball cap, looked at the glass villa and then at the stack of beat-up, beige folding tables and mismatched brown and gray folding chairs, and then back at me. "This is it?" he asked. "This is it," I said. I set them up myself, arranging them in that perfect open U shape, facing the ocean. The geometry was perfect. Next, the linens. I went to my hall closet, the one with the stacks of perfectly coordinated, 500 thread count Belgian linen, all in shades of oyster, bone, and fog, the color palette of my old life, the color of beige. There wasn't enough. I pulled them all out anyway. Then I went to my bedroom, and I pulled the bright, patterned quilt off my bed, the one Grandma Ruth had made me. I went to a storage chest and found the stack of bright red and white checkered tablecloths I'd had in college. I brought them all out. I laid them on the tables, the elegant, oyster gray linen next to the crazy, patchwork quilt, the college red checkers next to a formal dining white. It was a visual riot. It was a cacophony. It was the most beautiful table I had ever set. It was a room full of people who had nothing in common except that I loved them. Carla arrived with the flowers, 10 buckets of sunflowers, purple asters, black-eyed Susans, and things I didn't even know the names of. They were so bright they hurt my eyes. We scattered them, on the floor, on the tables, on the kitchen counter. "The theme is fun," I told her, and she laughed. I went back to the snuffed-out candles. I had dozens of them. I gathered them all and, instead of the formal, single line, I clustered them in the center of the U, a great glowing pile of them, mixing tall tapers with short, fat pillars. It was a bonfire on the table, a landing strip for all the conversations that were about to happen. I looked at my never-invited list. Jules, single mother. Unstable, Jules was bringing her kids, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. My house was a temple of glass and steel and sharp, concrete corners. It was a childless, perfect, dangerous space. I had to fix that. I went to my office and found a stack of my softest wool throw blankets. I found a corner of the great room, a space protected from the main flow of traffic, and I laid them down, creating a soft, warm island. I looked around. I had no toys. But then I saw it, on my office shelf, a row of my old, failed architectural models. Strange, abstract shapes of basswood and foam core, the failures, the early attempts. I gathered them up. They were sturdy, non-toxic, and impossible to break. I piled them on the blanket. They were the best, most expensive building blocks in the world. I was giving the children my failures to play with. I was designing a space for them to be messy. Finally, at 5:20, the house was ready. The U-shaped table was a riot of color. The kids' corner was soft and waiting. The buckets of flowers were so loud they were screaming. And then, Mr. Vittori arrived. He and 2 of his nephews carried in massive, steaming, foil-wrapped trays. The second they opened the door, the smell hit. Not beeswax, not ocean, garlic, rich, roasted, unbelievable garlic, tomato sauce, oregano, the smell of nonna pias, the smell of home. It filled the house, a joyous, fragrant invasion. I stood in the middle of the room. I was sweating. I probably had sauce on my face. And I did the last, most important thing. I walked over to the 20-foot wall of glass, my perfect, climate-controlled, storm-proof barrier. I grabbed the steel handle, and I pulled. The massive doors slid open, a smooth, engineered sigh. The Atlantic wind roared in. It was cold. It was loud. It made the flowers tremble and the napkins fly off the table. It was chaos, and I let it. I let the smell of the garlic and the flowers and the sea all mix together. I let the sound of the wind and the waves fill my perfect, quiet house. I took a deep breath. I tasted salt, garlic, and tomato. I looked at the U-shaped table, a structure of welcome. I looked at the corner for the children, a structure of safety. I am a builder, I whispered to the wind. So I build. I didn't need a playlist. I had the ocean. And I stood by the open door, listening to the waves, waiting for the sound of the first car. The first sound was not the elegant crunch of tires on a gravel driveway. It was a high, thin, metallic rattle, a sound I associated with my early 20s and profound mechanical failure. I looked out the massive glass wall, and there it was, rattling its way up my pristine, newly paved drive, Jules's 1998 Toyota Sienna. The color was an indeterminate beige green, half of it oxidized. The passenger side door a slightly different, unoxidized color from a junkyard. It wheezed to a stop. The sliding door, which I knew from experience only opened from the outside, was shoved open, and two small, shrieking human beings, her sons, 5 and 7, tumbled out. They were immediately, instinctively, drawn to the largest, most expensive piece of glass on the eastern seaboard. Jules emerged from the driver's side, wrestling a giant, overstuffed diaper bag and a foil-covered casserole dish. "Don't touch the glass," she yelled. But it was too late. Both kids had pressed their faces and, more critically, their hands flat against the storm-proof pane. "I am so sorry." "Aves," she said, running up to the open door, her face a mask of stressed-out mother. "We stopped for snacks. They're sticky. Oh, God. That's a fruit roll-up. On your palace." I looked at the two perfect, 5-fingered, translucent, sticky red handprints marring the perfect $1,000,000 view. My mother's voice was in my head, a phantom shriek of horror. "My God, what an animal!" I looked at Jules's panicked face. I looked at the sticky handprints, and I started to laugh. Not a polite titter, a full, deep, from-the-gut laugh. It was the first, glorious, beautiful imperfection. It was the proof that the house was being lived in, not just looked at. "Jules," I said, taking the casserole from her, "if this house can't handle a fruit roll-up, I designed it wrong. Get in here." The spell was broken. The house was no longer a museum. It was a home. The arrivals came quickly after that, a parade of pickup trucks, old sedans, and sensible Hondas. Sal, my foreman, arrived with his wife, who handed me a bottle of homemade limoncello. "He built this house in his head every night for 2 years. Honey," she said, patting my arm. "We're so proud." Then, a rusty Ford Ranger rumbled up. Caleb, my cousin. The wasted potential. He stepped out, and I saw him hesitate at the doorway. He was wearing his work boots, the ones caked in sawdust and varnish. He was holding a small, awkwardly wrapped package. He looked at the concrete floors, at the steel beams, as if afraid he would get something dirty. "You're tracking in sawdust. Caleb," I said, walking up to him. He froze, his face turning red. "Oh, man, Aves, I'm sorry. I should have—" "Good," I said, pulling him into a hug. "It smells like the studio. I've missed it." I took his arm and pulled him out onto the cantilevered deck, the wind whipping his hair. "I've been waiting for you, the crew that set the final I-beam on this cantilever. I think they were off by a 16th on the tension. What do you think of the joist hangers?" I watched his entire posture change. The awkward, out-of-place cousin disappeared, and the master craftsman materialized. He squinted at the sky. He put his hand on the steel beam, feeling its vibration in the wind. "A 16th?" he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Nah, they were off by an 1/8, but the engineer compensated with the weld. Smart, very smart. Let me see the plans for the decking as—" I left him there, talking to Sal. 2 master builders, 2 men my father would have dismissed, now holding court on the most complex structure I had ever built. A taxi pulled up. Ms. Adler, my high school teacher. She was older, her hair a soft, brilliant white, but she had the same sharp, intelligent eyes. She walked into the great room and just stopped. She didn't look at the ocean. She didn't look at the furniture. She was looking at the bones. "Oh, Avery," she whispered. She had found the small corner where I'd left a few of my working blueprints, the ones showing the load-bearing calculations. Her hand, thin and papery, traced the lines of the foundation. "Oh, my dear girl." Her eyes were full of tears. She looked up at me, and her gaze was as direct and as validating as it had been 20 years ago. "You were always," she said, her voice thick, "the best builder in the class." And then, Grandma Ruth. She did not arrive in a taxi. She arrived in what looked like a 1980s black Lincoln town car, driven by a man half her age who was clearly, deeply, afraid of her. She exploded out of the car. She was 81 years old, and she was wearing a full, floor-length, bright purple sequin jacket. She looked like a fabulous, aging disco ball. She was not carrying a casserole. She was holding a single, store-bought, aluminum tin apple pie. "Avery North," she boomed, marching through the open door. The wind catching her jacket, the entire room turned. "You build a house like this and you invite me to a lasagna party?" "Grandma," I said, laughing and hugging her. The sequins were scratching my cheek. She pushed the pie into my hands. "It's from the gas station. The crust is pure hydrogenated oil. I dare you to criticize it. Now, where's the wine? And who is the handsome man in the work boots? He looks like he knows how to fix things, unlike your grandfather." The party was alive. It was not the party I had planned, but it was the party I needed. The house was full of sound. In my sterile, all-white, minimalist kitchen, Maria and Hector were holding court. They had taken over the wine, and they were chatting in rapid fire, joyous Spanish with Mr. Vittori, who was gesturing wildly, his nephews laughing as they refilled the garlic bread. In the kids' corner, Jules's two boys had found my architectural models. They had abandoned them as boring blocks and were, instead, screaming with laughter as they built a massive, teetering fort out of my $500 cashmere throw pillows. I saw it. I did not care. And the U-shaped table was a miracle. It was working. The mismatched cloths, the buckets of wildflowers, the bonfire of candles. It was a perfect, warm, inviting mess. People were serving themselves from the buffet on the walnut table. They were sitting on the folding chairs, and they were talking. The geometry was magic. There was no head. There was no foot. There was just the circle. A story that started with Ms. Adler at one end would get picked up by Sal's wife, which would make Caleb laugh, which would prompt Grandma Ruth to tell a deeply inappropriate joke, which would make everyone roar. The conversations were passing around the U-shape like a current of electricity, all of it lit by the bonfire of candles in the middle. I stood back for a moment, near the open door, a glass of wine in my hand. I was watching the scene, the laughter, the food, the light, and my eyes drifted to the two honor seats. They were still there, by the glass wall, where I had left them. Two perfect, expensive, linen-wrapped, beige chairs. They were completely empty. No one had sat in them. No one had even looked at them. They were irrelevant. They were just furniture. They were the last remnants of the old, cold solar system, and in this new, loud, warm, chaotic universe, they had no gravity at all. I looked at them, and the pang I had been braced for, the stab of rejection, the ache of their emptiness. It never came. It was gone. All I felt was a profound, quiet, structural relief. I had over-engineered for a client who was never going to show up, and I didn't need the chairs anymore. Just then, the sound of a fork clinking against a glass cut through the noise. The room quieted. Grandma Ruth, she was standing, her purple sequins glittering in the candlelight. She was holding a plastic cup full of red wine. She looked magnificent. "All right, everybody, listen up," she boomed, her voice the one my mother had spent a lifetime trying to silence. "I'm old, and I don't have time for long speeches, but I've been to a lot of houses in my life, rich houses, poor houses, sad houses, and boring as sin houses. She shot a look at me, and it was full of love. But I have never, she said, been to a house that was built with so much truth. I am looking at a girl who was told her whole life to be quiet, to be practical, and to be beige, and she went and built a palace. Not just a palace, but a smart one. She raised her plastic cup. "This place," she said, her voice dropping, just a little. "This place is built like her. It is all steel, and it is all glass, and it is built to look the ocean right in the eye and not blink." She smiled, a wide, lipstick-smeared grin. "I want to make a toast." She raised her glass high. "To Avery, who finally learned that you don't build a palace for the people who ignore you. You build it for the people who see you." She paused, looking at Caleb, and Ms. Adler, and Jules. She built a palace out of the crooked, leftover wood that nobody else wanted. The room was silent for a beat, and then the explosion. To Avery." The shout came from everyone, from Sal, from Maria, from Jules, from Caleb, from Ms. Adler, from Mr. Vittori. It was a roar. "To Avery!" And as they all drank, as the room filled with cheers and laughter, the sound mixed with the other sound, the one that had been there all along, the sound of the Atlantic Ocean, roaring through the open door. It sounded like applause. It was the rhythm section, a deep, percussive, endless drumbeat, welcoming the house and all the people in it. I stood there, my face hot with tears, and I finally understood. I had been so wrong. I had been trying to build a structure to win an argument, but this was the truth. I looked at the sticky handprint, which was still on the glass, glowing in the candlelight. I looked at the crazy quilt table, at the circle of light, at the people who had shown up. I finally wrote the new equation in my head. The right house wasn't enough. The right table, the right people, and the right light. That's the only thing that ever makes a house warm. The party was ending. Not in a rush, but in a slow, satisfied fade. Jules's kids were asleep in the pillow fort, a tangle of small limbs and my best cashmere. Sal and Caleb were still by the open door, maps of their own in the stars, talking about wood grain and wind shear. Mr. Vittori and his nephews had left, but the kitchen was still warm, smelling of garlic and oregano. Ms. Adler was sitting by the unlit fireplace, nursing a small cup of coffee, and Grandma Ruth, her purple sequins now slightly less dazzling, was telling a long, complex, and probably untrue story to a captivated Maria. The house was full. It was a warm, breathing, lived-in space. "Hey, Aves," Jules said, pulling a blanket over her son. "What time is it?" "Almost 10, I think." "Isn't that—" she started. "Oh," I said. I had honestly completely forgotten. "Yeah, I guess it is." "Well, turn it on," she said. "We want to see. The room's for the rest of us thing." A small ripple of excitement went through the room. "Turn it on, kid," Grandma Ruth boomed. I walked over to the recessed 80-inch screen. I hadn't turned it on since the disastrous night a week ago. I pressed the remote. The screen flickered to life, not with a cable signal, but with the quiet, ambient art I had programmed. I found the right channel. We were just in time. The show's upbeat. Annoying theme music was fading, and then there was my house. It was strange. Seeing it through someone else's lens. The cameras were doing things I never could. They were swooping. Drones were flying past the cliff edge, racing the gulls. The music was all soaring strings and dramatic, deep piano chords. They made my house look like a fortress, a beautiful, lonely, expensive fortress. "Wow, boss," Sal said, his voice quiet. "They're making it look dramatic." The host's voice, chipper and polished, was explaining the structural challenges, the 30-foot caissons, the storm-proof glass, the $6 million budget. And then I heard my own voice. It was the voiceover I had recorded months ago, in a sterile sound booth in the city. It was calm, measured, and sounded much smarter than I felt. The camera was panning across the great room, which was empty and clean in the footage, showing the perfect hierarchical line of the walnut table I had since banished. The host asked me about the lack of traditional, formal spaces, my voice said, clear and sure. The camera zoomed in on a single steel beam. For me, fairness isn't just an aesthetic, my voice continued. It's not a coat of paint or a decorative throw pillow. It's the frame. It's the foundation. If the structure is unfair, no amount of decoration can fix it. The camera cut to a final, heroic shot of the villa against the angry purple sunset. The credits rolled. A commercial for a walk-in bathtub started. The room was silent. Everyone was looking at me. Ms. Adler was the first to speak, her voice soft. "Well," she said, dabbing her eye. "That was just wonderful. Avery, the frame, that's my girl." Grandma Ruth was squinting at me, her head tilted. She wasn't looking at the TV. She was looking at me. "Well, hell, kid," she said, her voice gravelly. "It was just a TV segment, Grandma," I said, feeling suddenly shy, reaching for the remote to turn it off. "The hell it was," she said, waving a hand. "Don't you dare turn it off. You think you were talking about chairs and windows in that little speech?" She shook her head, her sequin jacket rustling. "You were telling your whole damn life story, Avery, every last word of it." She was right, and as if her words had summoned them, as if the broadcast of the truth had been a dog whistle I never knew I held. My phone exploded. It wasn't a ring, it was a detonation. I had left it on the quartz kitchen counter, and the vibration was a harsh, jarring, electric scream against the stone. It sounded like an alarm, a fire drill in the middle of our warm, quiet peace. Jules jumped. Sal looked around, startled. I walked over to it. The screen was blindingly bright. "Mom." I stared at it. I had not heard from her. From any of them. Since the text, not a word. I pressed the silence button on the side. The vibration stopped. The screen went dark, and immediately, it lit up again. Mom, silence, lit up, Dad, silence, lit up, Sloan. It was a barrage, a coordinated, multi-front assault. They were all calling, all at once. They had all seen the show. "Avery?" Jules said, her voice small. "Are you okay?" "They saw the show," I said, my voice flat. "Clearly," Grandma Ruth said, taking a sip of her wine. "They must have finally figured out you're rich." "No," I said, watching it buzz. "Mom, Dad, Sloan. It's not that. They saw the validation. They saw the TV cameras. They don't care about the house. They care that the world is looking." A text message cut through the volley of calls. It was from Sloan. "Answer your phone, now. Mom is having a full-blown panic attack. You're making us look like monsters." I read the text out loud. "You're making us look like monsters." I looked at the phone. It was ringing again. Mom, I looked up. My audience, my real audience, was watching me. Caleb, the wasted potential, Jules, the unstable life, Ms. Adler, the witness, Grandma Ruth, the firecracker, my never-invited list, my jury. "You know what?" I said, my voice suddenly very, very calm. "I think I'll get this." I picked up the phone, but I didn't lift it to my ear. My hand was steady. I tapped the small, green icon on the screen, the speakerphone icon. I placed the phone, face up, on the center of the quartz counter, a new, cold light in the center of the room. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. "Hello, Mom," I said. The voice that came out of the phone was not my mother's. It was the voice of Judy North, the one she used when the neighbors were over. It was high-pitched, strained, and dripping with a frantic, false sweetness. "Avery, Avery, thank God. Finally. What is wrong with you? Your father and I have been calling and calling. We were worried sick." "I've been busy," I said. "I have guests." "Guests? Guests? Avery, did you see it? Did you see that program?
I saw it, I said.
This is a disaster, she shrieked, the sweetness already cracking, revealing the sharp, brittle panic underneath. A complete and utter disaster. The things you said, the things they had you say, about fairness, about structure. What were you thinking? I was thinking about architecture. Mom, it's my job. Don't be glib. Avery, you know exactly what you did. Our phone has not stopped ringing. Your Aunt Linda called. She wanted to know if everything was all right. She spat the word all right as if it were poison. You made it sound like we were awful people. Like you came from nothing. Like we were unfair. I described my design philosophy, I said. Well, you need to undescribe it, she snapped. This is what you're going to do. You are going to call that producer. First thing in the morning, you are going to tell them that they completely misunderstood you, that they took your words out of context. You need to issue a correction. Avery, a statement. You tell them you were speaking metaphorically. You tell them you have a wonderful, loving, supportive family who gave you everything. You have to fix this. You are making us look terrible.
There it was. Not. Congratulations on the show. Not. The house is beautiful. Avery. Not. We're sorry we missed the party. Just, you are making us look bad. Fix it.
Before I could even find the words, another voice cut through the air. A voice from in the room. A voice that was 100% done. Oh, for God's sake, Judy, shut up. It was Grandma Ruth. She had stood up from her chair and walked over to the counter. She was staring down at the glowing phone like it was a bug she was about to step on. The phone was silent for a beat. Who is that? My mother's voice finally said, small and tinny. Is that Mother? You're damn right it's Mother, Ruth said, leaning in, her purple sequins reflecting on the countertop. And I'm sitting right here in this palace your daughter built. This palace you and your husband and that spoiled, rotten other girl couldn't be bothered to drive 2 hours to come and see. I'm here, and so is her teacher, and her cousin, and her friends. We're all here. We've been here all night. Mother, this is a private family conversation, my mother shrieked. The Judy voice completely gone, replaced by raw panic. Avery, take me off speakerphone. This is inappropriate. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was solid. It is a family conversation, Judy, Grandma Ruth said, her voice dropping, becoming lethally calm. It's the conversation we've all been watching you avoid for 34 years. The program didn't misunderstand a damn thing, and neither did your busybody sister Linda. You're not upset because Avery lied. You're upset because, for the very first time in her life, she went on television and told the truth.
That is up on.
She was ignored. Ruth's voice cracked like a whip. I watched you do it. I watched you and Frank treat this brilliant, incredible girl like a piece of beige furniture, while you threw parades every time Sloane managed to tie her own shoes. I watched you dim her light, over and over, because Sloane's was brighter. You're not embarrassed by the implication. Judy, you're embarrassed by the accuracy. A horrible, strangled, gasping sound came from the phone. My mother, completely cornered, did what she always did. She changed tactics. She went from defense to offense. How dare you, she sputtered. Both of you, attacking me, in her house. This is so dramatic. It's completely exaggerated. We loved Avery. We always loved her. She was a quiet child. She was happy. This is a fantasy you've built. This is revenge. Grandma Ruth sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It was a sigh of profound, ancient exhaustion. The sigh of a woman who had seen the whole, stupid play, from overture to a bad ending, one too many times. It's not dramatic, Judy, Ruth said, her voice suddenly soft, almost sad. It's just memory. It's what happens when you finally look at the past without angling the light to make yourself look better. It's just the truth, without the shadows. A beat of pure, static-filled silence from the phone. And then, click. She had hung up. The final, ultimate weapon. The punitive silence. The one she had used to control me since I was a child. When the truth got too bright, she just turned off the lights and left the room. The phone screen went dark. The room was utterly silent. I could hear, very faintly, the sound of the ocean outside. Jules was staring at me, her mouth open. Ms. Adler had her hand over her heart. Caleb looked like he wanted to break something. The old feeling started to creep in. The cold, familiar panic. You've done it now. You went too far. You broke it. You're alone. I looked at the dark phone, the source of the noise. I looked at Grandma Ruth. She was already turning back to the table. "Well," she huffed, "that's that. Anybody want the last cannoli?" I looked at Jules. She broke the silence first. She raised her plastic cup, which was now empty. "For the record," she whispered, "that was the single most terrifying and badass thing I have ever seen in my life." Ms. Adler just nodded at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across her face. "Structure, Avery," she said, her voice clear. "Solid." And the cold feeling, it just evaporated. It was gone. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since that 9th grade science fair. I didn't scramble to call her back. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize to my guests. I simply reached out. I picked up the small, black, poison-filled rectangle, and I did what I should have done 20 years ago. I turned it over, screen down, and placed it on the quartz counter with a small, final, definitive click. The noise was over. The box was closed. I walked over to the open door. The cold night air felt good on my face. The wind was steady. The ocean was doing its job. Wave after wave. A rhythm that didn't care about my family, my mother, or my phone. It was just the tide. It was just the truth. I felt this, for the first time, exactly the same. The ocean was calm. I was calm. This was my house. This was my room. And I, finally, was the one who owned the light. The silence that followed the party, and the phone call, was different, before. The silence in my house had been a void. The cold, expensive echo of an empty vessel. But after the party, the silence was warm. It was the sound of a house settling after a great, joyous storm. It was the silence of embers in a fireplace. It was full. My guests had left. Jules and her sleeping sons. Caleb and Sal. Full of wine and new ideas. Ms. Adler, who had pressed a small, worn copy of The Fountainhead into my hands. Just for fun. And Grandma Ruth, who, as she was being helped into her Lincoln, had turned and said, "Don't you dare let them break this. Avery, this house, it's the truest thing I've ever seen you build." For 3 days, that punitive, familiar silence emanated from my parents' end of the world. My phone, which had detonated with such panic and rage, was now a dead, black rectangle. They had hung up on me. They had left the room, and they were waiting for me to do what I had always done, apologize for the truth, and beg for re-entry. I sat in the great room, watching a storm build over the ocean. The house was clean. The folding chairs were gone. The sticky handprint had been wiped away. It was all perfect, polished, and quiet again. And I knew, with the certainty of a structural engineer, that it was not finished. The foundation was sound. The frame was up. But the final, load-bearing beam was not yet locked into place. The final act of construction had to be mine. I picked up the phone. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was an architect. Looking at a blueprint, I had a problem to solve. I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the first ring, a testament to the fact she had been staring at the phone, waiting for my surrender. "Hello?" she said. The word was a shard of ice. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice calm, flat. "I'm having dinner tonight, 7 o'clock, just family, no cameras." A long, pressurized silence. I could hear her breathing. I could hear her calculating. This was not the apology she wanted. This was an invitation, a summons. It was an act of power, not submission.
Sloane is here, she finally said, her voice wary. We have plans. Cancel them, I said. It was not a request. 7:00, my house.
I hung up before she could respond. The old Avery would have cajoled and begged and offered to make it another time. The new Avery was just sending the coordinates. The next move was theirs.
I did not call a chef. I did not call a florist. I did not set the long, beautiful walnut dining table. I walked into my private home office, the room at the back of the house that overlooked a small, quiet, moss-covered rock garden, and there, against the wall, covered in blueprints and invoices, was my table. My first table. The crooked, solid one. I cleared the papers off it. I ran my hand over the burn mark from my soldering iron. I felt the deep, familiar gouge from the X-Acto knife. This was the origin. This was the proof. This was the only table that mattered. I had to get it into the great room. I put my shoulder against it. It was heavy. A dead, awkward weight. I began to push. The table legs, the uneven ones, the one shored up with a rock. Caught on the threshold of the office, I shoved. It moved, and the sound that ripped through the perfect, quiet house was a violation. It was the sound of that flat rock, the one I'd shoved under the leg when I was 13, scraping a long, white, jagged scar across my perfect, hand-polished, gray concrete floor. It was a horrific sound. A shriek, a wound. The old Avery would have screamed, would have stopped, would have called for help, would have been devastated by the imperfection, the marring of the $6 million surface. I paused. I looked at the white scar on the floor. It was beautiful. It was a line connecting the past to the present. I set my shoulder again, and I pushed. I scraped that table all the way through the hall. I didn't care about the floor. The floor was just a floor. The table was the frame. I pushed it into the absolute, dead center of the great room, right under the most expensive light fixture. It looked absurd. It was small, dark, and scarred. An ugly, crooked, honest thing in a room of breathtaking, expensive glass. I went and found 5 chairs, not the honor seats, which I had moved to a guest room, not the beige folding chairs, just 5 simple, identical, unadorned oak chairs from my breakfast nook. I placed them around the small, ugly table, one for Mom, one for Dad, one for Sloane, one for Grandma Ruth, who I had already called and who was, as she put it, my backup, and one for me. There was no head. There was no foot. There was just this tight, small, unavoidable circle. Then, I went to the kitchen. I did not make fancy food. I made the food I had read about in books, the food I associated with the lost Sundays of a childhood I never had. I put a chicken in the oven to roast. I chopped potatoes, and carrots, and onions, and surrounded the chicken with them. The house, which usually smelled of sea salt and structural steel, began to fill with the scent of thyme and rosemary and roasting potatoes, the smell of a normal family. I baked an apple pie, from scratch. The smell of cinnamon and roasting apples joined the thyme. It was the most potent act of creation I had ever performed. At 6:30, Grandma Ruth arrived, humming, wearing a simple black dress. "Good," she said, sniffing the air. "You're feeding them. It's hard to yell when your mouth is full of pie. Smart kid." She sat down, not at the table, but on the cold gray sofa, and put her feet up. At 7:01, the doorbell rang. I opened it. They were standing there as a unit, a phalanx, Mom, Dad, and Sloane. They were dressed up, not in dinner party clothes, in armor. My mother in a stiff, navy blue suit, Sloane in a tight black dress, her makeup perfect and severe, my father in a blazer. They had not come to dinner. They had come to a board meeting. They had come for the counterattack. "Hello," I said, holding the door open. My mother marched past me, her heels clicking. "Avery?" Sloane breezed past, already on her phone, not looking at me. My father paused. "Avery," he said. He looked tired.
They walked into the great room, and they all, as one, stopped dead. Their posture of attack deflated, replaced by a profound, disorienting confusion. They were staring, not at the ocean, which was a perfect, deep purple at dusk, not at the soaring, 20-foot ceilings. They were staring at the table, this small, ugly, scarred thing in the middle of my palace. Sloane was the first to speak, her voice a reedy, disbelieving sneer. "What is this? Are we eating here? Avery, is this some kind of joke?" My mother just stared, her face pinched, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup rings. "Avery, what is this? This is that thing from the shed. You kept this?" She looked at the white scratch on my floor, and her hand flew to her mouth in genuine horror. "Avery, your floor!" But my father said nothing. He had walked past them. He was standing right over the table. Just as I had pictured, he was not looking at the scratch. He was looking at the wood grain. He did what he had done 21 years ago. He laid his large, quiet hand flat on the surface. He ran his thumb, almost unconsciously, over the deep, jagged, ugly saw line I had made on my first cut, the one where I had bled. He looked at me. His face was not angry. It was not proud. It was just quiet. He knew this table. This was the origin. This was the blueprint. He had been the only one to see it. "It's crooked," he had said, "but it's very solid." He pulled out one of the simple oak chairs, the one with the best view of the ocean, and he sat down. The silence was his assent. The dinner was a new kind of silence, not the warm, full silence of the night before. This was a tactical, brittle silence. I served the chicken, I served the potatoes, I served the pie. I sat, and I ate. I did not apologize. I did not explain. I did not fill the silence. Sloane, who cannot exist without a spotlight, tried to create one. "This sofa, Aves," she said, waving her fork at it. "This gray, it's so cold. It's like a hotel. I think a nice, warm beige would have been so much better, or a pattern." "It's the salt," my mother chimed in, picking at her chicken. "That's what I said. It's just a nightmare. The salt air, Avery. It's going to corrode all this steel. It's going to etch the glass. You'll be a slave to this place. A slave." They were attacking the house. They were attacking the new structure. They were chipping at the new paint, looking for a flaw. The old Avery would have defended the sofa, would have explained the anti-corrosive coating on the steel, the specific laminated glass ratings. I just took a bite of chicken. "More wine, Sloane?" I asked. I was not asking for their approval of the house. I was not asking for their validation. I was not performing for them. I was simply the host. I was giving them a seat. I was serving them a meal. The power was absolute. I was not the guest in their solar system. They were visitors in mine. They were not sitting at the North family table, where my father was the king, and Sloane was the son, and I was the ghost. They were sitting at my table, the crooked one, the one I had built from scraps while they were ignoring me. They were sitting in my house, which was built on the foundation of that table. The truth of it, the structural, unshakable truth, settled on all of us. The plates were clear. The pie was eaten. The tension was a living thing in the room. My father pushed his chair back. He cleared his throat. Sloane stopped texting. My mother looked at him, annoyed. He nodded. Once, he looked out at the ocean, then back at the room. "Big house," he said. He looked down at his empty plate. "Good chicken." It was not, "I love you." It was not, "I'm sorry." It was crooked, but solid. It was his language. It was the fact. It was his acknowledgement. And my chest, which had been tight for a month, for a lifetime, eased. Just a fraction. Then my mother, she had been staring. Her eyes narrowed, not at me, at the table. Her hand, her manicured, perfect hand, reached out. She touched the deep, black, circular burn mark from my college soldering iron. She traced it, her fingernail clicking,
just slightly, on the scarred wood. "You did well, Avery," she said. Her voice was quiet. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the scar. It was not, "We're proud of you." It was not, "We love you." It was a concession. It was a statement of fact, from a woman who could no longer deny the evidence in front of her. The house, the TV show, the success, the structure. She couldn't see the process. She could never see the why. But she could not, finally, deny the what. "You did well, Avery." It was the period at the end of the longest sentence of my life. It was the click, the sound of the lock, the one I had been waiting for, the one I had built the entire $6 million house to hear. Finally, quietly, clicking into place. It was not the warmth of a hug. It was the cold, satisfying, final sound of a beam slotting into its load-bearing joint. And it was enough. When my mother said those 4 words, "You did well, Avery," the sound landed in the quiet room like a key I had been forging for my entire life. I had built a $6 million house to hear that sound, and as it clicked into place, as the lock turned, I realized what was on the other side. It was not love. It was not warmth. It was not an apology. It was a concession. It was the end of the argument. It was the only language she and they knew how to speak. It was the language of facts, of visible proof, of undeniable, external validation. And as that realization settled over me, a new, much quieter, and much more profound click happened inside my own chest. I would never get an "I'm sorry." I would never get an "We were wrong." They did not possess the emotional blueprint for that kind of construction. And in that one, single, liberating moment, I knew I no longer needed them to. I had been trying to get them to see my world, to speak my language. I had failed. So I had built a world so solid, so true, that they were forced to enter it and speak theirs. "You did well" was their "I'm sorry." It was their "We see you," and it would have to be enough, because I was done translating. I stood up from the crooked table. The dinner was over. The air was thick with 21 years of unsaid things. "Avery?" my mother asked, her voice wary, sensing a shift. I didn't answer. I walked to my office, the sound of my heels a sharp, lonely sound on the scratched concrete. I opened a drawer. I took out a single, heavy, cream-colored piece of cardstock. I took my best pen, the one with the heavy black ink. I walked back to the table. Grandma Ruth was watching me, a sharp, knowing look in her eye. My father was sipping his water. Sloane was checking her reflection in her dark phone screen. I placed the paper on the scarred, burned surface of the walnut table. This was not an act of anger. This was not a performance. This was the final step of the construction. This was the building code. This was the certificate of occupancy. My hand was perfectly steady. I wrote. At the top, I wrote, "The rules of the beach house table." Underneath, I wrote 3 simple structural laws. 1. Everyone who enters this house has an equal seat. 2. No one has to be loud to be heard. 3. To sit here, you accept the rules. There are no honor seats. I looked at the 3 rules. They were the thesis. They were the foundation. They were the frame. I signed my name at the bottom, Avery North. Sloane looked up. "What is that? More homework?" I didn't answer her. I went to the kitchen drawer and got a roll of clear, 2-inch-wide packing tape. I knelt on the floor. My father, my mother, my sister, they all watched me. It was a strange, silent, uncomfortable ritual. I reached under the crooked table, the one I had built when I was 13. I turned the paper over, and I pressed it flat against the raw, unfinished underside of the wood. I tore off a piece of tape with my teeth and I secured the left side. I tore off another and secured the right. The rules were now, physically, part of the foundation. You would never see them, but you would be sitting on top of them. The code was in place. I stood up. My mother was staring at me, her face pale. She knew a contract had just been written and signed without her, and she knew, instinctively, that it was binding. Sloane just looked confused. This was a language of quiet,
permanent action. It was not her language. She put her phone away, sensing the spotlight, for the first time in her life, was just off. My father, in his simple oak chair, leaned back. He leaned over, slowly, his blazer pulling tight, until his head was almost parallel with the floor. He angled his head, reading the upside-down words taped to the bottom of the table. He read Rule 1. He read Rule 2. He read Rule 3. He stayed there, in that awkward, uncomfortable position, for a long, silent moment. Then, he brought his chair back down to the floor with a solid, definitive thump. He looked at me, his face unreadable. He gave a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. The architect had read the blueprint. The structure was sound. The air in the room was spent. It was thick with the ghosts of roasted chicken and old, bitter arguments. It was the air of a room that had been sealed for a lifetime. I walked over to the 20-foot wall of glass. I put my hand on the cold steel handle, and I pulled. The massive door, a ton of engineered glass and steel, slid open with a soundless, expensive sigh. And the ocean rushed in. It wasn't a breeze. It was a physical, cleansing force. The cold, raw, salt-heavy wind of the late-night Atlantic flooded the great room. It swirled around the table, making the candles flicker. It billowed the curtains. It smelled of deep, cold water, of salt, of distance, of a world that was infinitely larger and more powerful than this tiny, hot, family drama. It was new air in old lungs. It was the house, finally, breathing. My family stood up. The silence was the signal. The meeting was over. My mother grabbed her purse. Sloane was already texting, ordering her car. My father walked to the door, pausing to put his hand on the steel beam, feeling its solidity. He looked at me. "Good chicken," he said again. Then they left. I didn't walk them out. I stood in the center of the great room, by my crooked table, and I watched them go. The door closed. The house was silent. Grandma Ruth had been watching all of it from the sofa. She got up, her joints cracking, and came to stand beside me at the open door. We both stood there, looking out at the dark, churning water, the wind whipping our hair. She nudged me, hard, with her elbow. "The frame is set, kid," she said, her voice full of satisfaction. "Solid." I smiled. I looked across the room. The two honor seats, the ones that had been my obsession, my monument to their rejection, were still pushed against the far wall. They were just objects, two beautifully made, very expensive, and completely meaningless beige chairs. Their power was gone. I walked over, picked one up. It was lighter than I remembered, and carried it to the crooked walnut table. I set it down. It was just a backup chair. It was for Jules, or Caleb, or Sal. It was for anyone who needed a place to sit. I picked up my phone, the one my mother had hung up on. The screen was dark. I opened my texts. I found the group chat for the right side list. My thumbs moved quickly. "Thank you all for coming," I typed. "This was just a structure. You all made it a home." I paused, then sent a new message. "First Sunday of every month, 7 p.m., I'm calling it Open Table. My house. Lasagna is mandatory. Everyone has a seat." Later that night, I turned off all the lights. The house was dark, but the moon was full, and a clean, cold light was pouring in through the glass walls. It was a neutral light, a fair light. It lit the entire, massive, expensive room. It lit the polished floors, the steel beams, and the soaring, 20-foot ceiling. And in the dead center of it all, that single, pure beam of moonlight landed on the smallest, oldest, darkest, most scarred object in the room. My table. It sat there, ugly, and crooked, and solid as the bedrock it was anchored to. The rules of the house were taped to its belly. The $6 million house was just the shell. The table was the heart. The knot in my chest, the one I had been carrying since I was a child, was gone. It hadn't been untied with a final, screaming confrontation. It hadn't been loosened by an apology, it had simply been rendered obsolete. I had built a new structure, a new frame, that made the old, broken one irrelevant. My victory wasn't forcing them to see me. It was building a world where their gaze no longer mattered. The war was over, not because I had won, but because I had built a house so strong. The war couldn't even get past the door. And in this house, everyone had a seat. That was the only win I ever needed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button. It really helps get these stories out to more people who need to hear them.